Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Business of Possibility podcast with Ulster University Business School. I'm Wendy Austin, and in this series we've been diving deep into the world of business here in Northern Ireland, finding out what makes it tick and what keeps it awake at night. And apart from the pandemic, the one thing that does keep it awake at night is Brexit. Well, with just days to go before the end of the Brexit transition period, I have a top panel with me to reflect on recent Brexit developments, the key implications for cross-border trade for Northern Ireland's business sector, and to look at some practical steps that can be taken now to mitigate disruption in 2021. So with me, Stephen Kelly, UUBS Visiting Professor and Chief Executive at Manufacturing NI, Seamus Leheny, who's Policy Manager at Logistics UK, Aodhán Connolly, who's Director at the NI Retail Consortium, and Dr Trevor Cadden, Senior Lecturer at Ulster University Business School. Maybe we could start, chaps, by recapping on the current state of play. A bit doubtful about that given where we are at the moment, but I think it's good that we establish to a degree where we are and what we know is certain at this point. Stephen, would you maybe like to pick up on that for us first?
Sure, Wendy, it's great to see you first.
And you too.
You're sadly missed from our airwaves and our television screen, so it's great to see you in person, and great that the University of Ulster has picked you up here as well. Where are we? Well, what we do know is that the UK and the EU continue to have negotiations over what their future relationship may look like. That will have a profound impact on trade on this island and between these islands, and trade with the UK and the rest of the EU. But we also know that the UK and the EU have essentially copper fastened their commitment to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is there to protect not just the Good Friday Agreement, but the all-island economy as well. And in recent days, the UK government and the EU have come to some agreements on how that protocol will be made operational. They've added in some more new derogations, and the UK is committed to more mitigation and indeed compensation for the Northern Business community to try to make the protocol work, to try to ensure as best possible that trade between the trade across the island of Ireland, but also trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is made as smooth as possible. And those agreements are very welcome. Those agreements are very helpful, but they've all come extraordinarily late. And our biggest concern right now is that whilst there are some grace periods for some of those customs controls in the Irish Sea, a full customs border will be operational from the 1st of January 2021. So how we do business currently with customers supplying us from Great Britain will fundamentally change from the 1st of January. And businesses aren't ready, aren't prepared, don't have the resources, systems, processes in place. And it's not their fault, because all this has come too late and all this has come all at one time, and businesses are struggling as it is with the COVID pandemic, never mind Christmas, never mind Brexit on top of that.
Seamus, it sounds very much as though that would impact very heavily on your sector. Logistics is what brings everything here, takes it out, north, south, east, west, whatever. How are the companies that you represent set up here? I know that they've been working very hard on it, but as Stephen says, it's hard to work on something when you don't know what it is that you're working on necessarily.
Yeah, it's been almost like a race against time. A lot of companies at the start of the year, they were preparing, and then COVID just set everything back. And the problem is, I don't think engagement's been lacking from government. We've certainly had lots of engagement, but it's the clarity and the guidance, and it's the politics that's held back that clarity. So businesses have been planning for something on the 1st of January, but they don't exactly know what it was. Now we are starting to get, the veil's been lifted a little bit, but time's against us. And there's this almost like a scramble for skills as well, where if I even go on to LinkedIn today, I will see there's transport companies all over Northern Ireland are trying to look for people with customs experience, because they're obviously trying to offer that service in-house to give reassurance to their traders, their customers. So the people are trying to do it in-house. They're obviously going to utilise the trader support service as well. And it is going to take a lot of time and money to get this right, because the government will say, well, things like the Trader Support Service, it means it's free, but we still have to do the groundwork in this. It's the collection of the data and then inputting it in to get the customs clearances done. So that's going to cost a lot of money, and I think ultimately those costs will have to be passed on along the supply chain.
I should have retrained in customs, shouldn't I, whenever I step down. And Aidan, for your sector, for retail, I mean, it just has been a totally nightmare year in every conceivable way. And the way things are at the moment, what is it the government say? Check, change, go. How can they do that when they don't know whether they're open? Half of them have gone bust. The high streets are open one day, closed the next. How on earth are they managing, and how are you managing to help them?
Well, firstly, I'm in shock that I now have to call Stephen Kelly professor. But no, it's been the hardest year in my memory for retail. The fact that we've had non-essential had to close for such a long time this year. And the fact is, because of the sort of Duke of York or Grand Old Duke of York syndrome that we had last year, building up the Brexit and then building down again, building up the Brexit and then building down again. There was an awful lot of money spent then, and that sort of those sort of Brexit preparations really did eat into any sort of war chest that they had. If you look even at the retail industry, when I came in here about 10 years ago, it was about 5% was your average profit margin. We're now sitting at somewhere around 1.5–2%, and in fact, some of the big guys were sitting under 1% profit margin at the first days of COVID, and even the grocery retailers who have been able to open, and people are saying, oh, so they've made billions. Firstly, they haven't made billions in Northern Ireland. Secondly, the costs just on the normal costs are about 15 million, but the biggest cost is the fact that we've had to invest in infrastructure. We are now doing click and collect and deliveries that we thought we would be doing in 8 years from now. We are now having to, and that's not just buying lorries and vans and extra people to do the deliveries, but it's actually the people who have to pick it as well. We've also had to employ lots of staff to do packing at different times whenever it's quiet, so that there can be social distancing. And then one of the biggest thing is that the vast majority of retailers who have had people self-isolate or shield, they've still been on full pay. And that means not only have we been paying those wages, but we've also had to bring other people in to do those jobs, which has been very welcome for some people, because we know there's been a lot of redundancies this year throughout. And the report that came out yesterday showed that the biggest of the 10,000 redundancies was the manufacturing sector and our own in retail. So there was some people who were able to get those jobs, and even now with the seasonal jobs. But the fact is that there is little wiggle room as far as profit margins. There is little cushion as far as financial cushion, and we've seen some really big names stumble and tumble this year. People were talking there about the fishing industry. The week before last, we had more people put on redundancy notice, or double the people put on redundancy notice than there is in the whole of the fishing industry in the UK, with 25,000 people put on redundancy notice. And that's your Debenhams, your Bon Marché, and your New Look group and the Arcadia group. And the other side of things is that for us, the complexity of doing business now, Great Britain to Northern Ireland, is something that we have never had to do. We're essentially being exporters and importers, and that's not what we've had to do before. For us, the big thing is that the agreement that we've had that came out last week, and we're still trying to get some more detail on it. It's good. The fact that 98% will be tariff-free, absolutely wonderful. In fact, it's more than we thought we would get. But other things, including having on day one to have your customs codes inputted. To put that into perspective, the average supermarket has about 47,000 items. Each of those will have to have the right customs code, and if they're a branded item, they'll have to have a merchant code as well. So even if we don't have tariffs, even if we don't have that overtly 57% on beef or 43% on mince beef, or sorry, 57% on cheese and 43% on mince beef. If we don't have those big tariffs, there is still going to be on day one a lot of disruption. And quite simply, we are trying now to mitigate the risk. We're trying. Very few people in retail will have a Christmas holiday this year.
One sector, I suppose, that doesn't get talked about much, but which is very much a part of all of this as well, is education. And Trevor, I wonder from your point of view, what about that sector? So there has been quite a bit of discussion over the last couple of days about things like the Erasmus scheme and so on, but for universities, for students, for business schools and so on, what are the implications for you?
Well, at a very basic level, cost is king in any business, and whenever cost and money's tight, the first thing that gets cut is training budget. And a lot of our education, particularly in the business school, is funded by local employers. So whenever that funding goes, then the ecosystem into the university goes. And the way we look at it, like a nexus of things, because a healthy business equals a healthy economy and society, which equals healthy universities, and that ecosystem is intertwined. So from a skills-based point of view, I did some work with Stephen, actually manufacturing A&I, in terms of getting supply chain ready for Brexit, and also with Intertrade Ireland and looking at the skills gap that is in the economy, particularly around SMEs and supply chain skills. And it was pretty evident that even without Brexit, without the pandemic, that a big issue is the lack of these skills within supply chain management, with 57% of firms don't have a supply chain strategy. Only 39% use any form of digital capabilities within their supply chain. And as we
sorry to cut across you there, Trevor, but even now, because one of the things that came out in the previous 6 episodes of the Business of Possibility that we did was the degree to which companies had been able to really up their digital game, not necessarily through choice, but actually through sheer necessity. So, I mean, even now, is that the case that so many companies don't have, aren't using the digital capability in their supply chain?
I think there's a shift towards that recognition more by default than by design, because in reality, there's a number of fusion projects that I work with which are basically northern universities working with southern SMEs. And there was one particular company there in the organic tan sector that were all very much into travel retail, and their business went upside down overnight. And they basically then, with resilience, reinvented themselves and put everything online. So, but if you're a business that's working 12, 14 hours every day, then it's very difficult to then just if you like pivot or reinvent yourself online overnight. And really what came out of all that is that, yes, businesses need to think differently, work differently, but there's still a skills gap there in terms of the knowledge to do that. And also there's a nervousness in doing that as well. The other big issue, I think, for universities is around the funding. If we look at European funding, even the EU structural funds, there was 3 billion came into Northern Ireland in the last funding round from 2014 to 2020. Now, arguably 2.3 billion of that was to do with the Common Agriculture Policy, and 80% of farming income comes through that policy. But even at a peace level, the peace funding was 230 million Horizon 2020, which is the interchange of international research collaboration, was almost 100 million in Northern Ireland alone. And Interreg funding was another 240 million. So I guess whenever funding goes down at a university level, then it impacts not only student mobility, but it impacts international research as well. We even have to look at the Cancer Centre in Northern Ireland, who Fortunately, unfortunately, I know all about it firsthand because I spent a bit of time in it a number of years ago, and a fantastic facility that it is. But that's a collaboration of international researchers coming together and sharing best practice. And if we lose out not only on the funding, but that opportunity to share that knowledge and that world-class skill, then it has real impact, not only in jobs, but in actually people's well-being.
Let's look at the two possible outcomes here. We'll start with the glass half full, shall we? I mean, Bertie Ahern says a deal is possible as long as Boris has no more dinners. So let's work on the basis that he's eating alone for the next wee while. We heard from Aidan about some of the massive challenges that retail's facing. But what about the changes for organisations moving goods between Northern Ireland and the UK, even if there is a deal? Seamus, how do you see that?
Well, the protocol stands whether there's a deal or no deal. I think, the last year or so has reflected maybe some people thought, well, let's just do a no deal and then the protocol won't bother us anymore, but it's actually there. Protocol's designed to be that parachute for us in a hard Brexit. So it changes the whole week. So a lot of logistics businesses, many of them have never had to deal with customs. You've only had to deal with customs if you did deep sea freight, Far East, North America, etc. So this is a whole new world to them. They've never had to do customs formalities, SPS and things. So what a lot of them have done, which I touched on earlier, they've had to recruit and train staff. But also for drivers as well, this is a massive undertaking because we're going to have drivers who are used to just maybe shunting loads back and forth between GB and Northern Ireland. Now all of a sudden, they're going to have to liaise with their head offices about basically getting paperwork through and references, because quite simply you won't be allowed onto a ferry in GB bound for Northern Ireland if you don't have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. It's not even a case where the ferry company will say, well, come on in and we can sort it out. They'll simply refuse entry. And that has problems then because you have boats then sailing without maybe the full consignment really of lorries that are booked to go on it, and then that costs money because the running cost for a truck's around about £1 a minute. So if you've got a lorry parked up overnight in England because they're waiting for a customs form to be signed off or dealt with, it's a lot of money, not just for the provider, but also it's lost time for the likes of Stephen and Aidan's members as well, who are waiting on those goods to come in. So probably the biggest change we've dealt with in a generation, more than a generation here in our industry.
Stephen, what about manufacturing? I mean, there's so many companies that rely on a just-in-time basis. There's so much stuff that has got to come here, be made into something else, and then sent somewhere else. On the check, change, go basis, you mentioned that lots of companies just really weren't prepared at the moment. But how would they view a deal of some description, the deal that looks like it might be done if we keep our fingers crossed?
Well, you struggle to find anybody in business in Northern Ireland that actually believes in Brexit as a project to start with, because they recognise that Brexit essentially just brings complexity, and when you bring complexity, you bring cost. And they get up every day to try to remove cost from their business, to try to achieve productivity, to try to achieve profitability. So to add disruption into the middle of that is not a welcome process to start with. When you add to that the challenges of COVID and Christmas on top of these customs elements, people are very worried about what this actually means for them. But what we're noticing more than anything else is that because of those other pressures that they've been endured, and because we've been led to the top of the hill so many times before, people believe the government has been crying wolf over this. And our biggest challenge as business representatives, because we engage with government every day, just before this call, we were on a meeting with the Secretary of State again. Our biggest challenge is to try to convince people that actually now is the time to spend that money. Now is the time to be prepared. Now is the time to bring in someone from Ulster University through a KTP project or whatever the case may be, to actually work intimately in your business to make sure that you're business ready and your business prepared. And then when you add on top of that, the real uncertainty that this has caused, the whole Brexit process, and indeed the lateness in which everything is coming now, has caused deep uncertainty, not just here, but across the UK and indeed Europe. And Northern Ireland's position hasn't had a chance to be articulated really in those markets. So we have customers or suppliers, in Great Britain who are going, well, I don't know if we can supply you or not. We have customers in Britain and in Europe who are going, are we allowed to buy from you or not? We have people requesting information that just doesn't exist because the government systems aren't up and running yet, etc., etc., etc. So the complications that this is bringing, particularly this late in the day, is leaving us deeply, deeply nervous about what January, February, and March can look like.
It is interesting that point that you make about not knowing whether they can supply people here or whether they can buy from us or whatever. I mean, I've read stories, and I'm sure you have too, about people getting letters saying, well, this is the last order I can send to you because I'm not going to be able to deal with you anymore. I mean, it's very hard to know how to deal with that kind of thing. And in something like the retail business, Aodhán, where you've got all of the other challenges that you mentioned as well, another layer is just what you don't need, I suspect.
Yeah, and we're very wary of those dreadful words, not available in Northern Ireland. And, there's a very, very simple equation in all this. And it's not just whether or not they can send it, it's whether or not they want to send it and it's profitable to send it. So
can be bothered.
Yeah, it's the bother. There's two simple equations in this. The first one is that the supply chain will always take the path of least resistance, and if there's too much resistance, they won't send it at all. The other one is that if the new costs are higher than the profit margins, then either the business model or the product, it becomes unviable. Up to now, we've been looking at what products could possibly become unviable. But now, there are some serious questions that are going to have to be asked of many retailers and many suppliers over the next sort of 6 months. Even if you look at that, what has been done on export health certificates, which is wonderful. 3 months with no export health certificates is a wonderful, wonderful position to be in, because export health certificates, they're up to about £200, including VAT, because there's VAT's time and there's all that sort of stuff. But you need one of those for every product of animal origin, every type of product of animal origin that you have on a load. Christmas time, 1,500 products on a load, somewhere around 400 or 500 of those, and because it's really busy at Christmas time, obviously. On a consolidated load, we'll need an export health certificate. So you're talking tens of thousands of pounds. So while we have that 3-month grace period, and I think this is something that Seamus, Stephen, and I have been, anytime we've got something through on the Northern Ireland protocol, we've said, thank you very much. Know what are you going to do for us? Because it's not enough to provide solutions. They have to be workable solutions, and they have to be solutions that are profitable for business to keep business to being able to come here to Northern Ireland and for able to send out from Northern Ireland. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is over the next 3 months is how do we get a solution that continues to work on export health certificates. But it's hugely complicated, and even with the EHCs, because of customs and because of delays and because of teething problems with the 3 new government IT systems, and because there is so much change at the one time, this is fundamental change in how we do business. We can't guarantee that there's not going to be disruption. What we can say as a retail industry is we're doing the best we can, and we are doing all the hard work so shoppers don't have to. But this is a once in a lifetime trade change.
Trevor, Stephen was talking there about the kind of assistance that can be available to companies, and at times like this, I suppose you can either do the equivalent of shoving all of the bills in the drawer of the hall table and hoping they go away, or actually just grabbing this by the scruff of the neck and saying, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get all the help that I possibly can. I'm going to use and bring in other minds, different attitudes, and see where this thing takes us. So say I'm in a company and I come to Ulster University and say to you, what can you do for me? How can you help me through this? What can your bright minds and young people and so on there do for our businesses at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that to note that businesses are born every 2 hours from UK universities. So there is a real hub that comes out of there, and that when we talk about that inextricably linked, again, that Northern Ireland term, it really is a link between businesses and academia. So that's why we recruit top people like Stephen as visiting professors, because we need that knowledge within our curriculum design. We need that within our courses, so that we're not just peddling out academic material, that it's something relevant to business, whilst obviously it has to be underpinned by the latest thinking and best in class frameworks. It has to be applicable to companies not only in Northern Ireland, but different sectors and different sizes within Northern Ireland. So one of the things that we do is obviously the knowledge transfer partnerships that Stephen talked about, where we work with research and design, and there's again government funding for that support. But on a local level around Brexit, there's a lot of work has been done where the local agencies have provided supports in the likes of Brexit vouchers, but also on a project that we work with Manufacturing NI and getting ready for Brexit. We developed an online portal with 10 bespoke supply chain modules, which gives companies very, if you like, accessible insights through the form of a 2-3 minute video, followed by some knowledge around that in a learn more section, and then a do more, which was the simple tools that organizations can apply to their business for supply chain health, or to do with the relationships or contracting, etc. Because I guess we all know that businesses, particularly now, if they're working 12, 14 hours a day, SMEs, don't want to have to spend the next 2-3 hours looking on the web. Where are the supports? And I think that's one of the disadvantages in Northern Ireland, coming from an advantage. We have a lot of different pots of advice and areas where companies can go to get information. But if you're an SME, you don't have the time to try and gravitate your way around that. So I think what we try to do at the university is be a one-stop shop for that, and provide the various solutions that are out there for each of those businesses.
Let me just pick up on that kind of assistance side of things with the three wise men, if I could here, because one of the interesting things, there are probably other ways I could describe you too, but one of the interesting things that's come out of both COVID and Brexit has been collaboration and a cooperation. I think particularly in COVID, that's been really interesting when you see companies who are in direct competition with one another, but who are almost kind of taking succor from the fact that there's somebody else who's in the same storm, although not necessarily the same boat. And I mean, the three of you didn't know each other before, now you do. You've spent probably far more time together than you ever wanted to, or would have ever expected to. But you've managed to present a kind of united front for us here, when people felt that, frankly, there wasn't really anybody else doing that. Not to get too political about it, but there wasn't another strong Northern Ireland voice. Let's be hopeful for a minute, say, and whichever one of you wants can jump in first in this. But how hopeful would you be that actually there might be something good that comes out of this, and that we might find ourselves in a good place? Stephen, you got your hand up first there.
Yeah, and I mean, to begin with your previous point, I mean, Aodhán, Seamus and I have developed a really good, strong, deeply trusting relationship. And
Still don't like you.
and which is a surprise to me, because Seamus is a Buncrana man and I'm a Derry man, and we don't tend to traditionally get on so well. But we did it because we had no voice and we had no choice. Quite simple. And I describe this in many respects. It's a bit like the Ireland rugby team. You need some people up front who dive in there where the boots are flying around, throw an Argentinian or two over your shoulder, clear the way for other people with the fancy feet to come through and score the tries.
And that would be Aodhán then.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but the critical thing about that is it's a team of 15 players, and whilst you very kindly talked about the efforts that we've made, but there's a lot of people out there who have been extraordinarily committed to trying to get this deal done and get this deal right. And that continues, and we're not going away. We're going to keep at it until we do get it right. Which leads me to actually, the protocol presents a really big opportunity for us. And in all the negativity around the protocol, understandable about trying to make sure that its fundamental change to our trading relationship within the United Kingdom is maintained and managed as best possible. Actually, regardless of what happens over the coming weeks, we will be the only place in the world that will have tariff-free, quota-free, rules of origin-free access to both the UK and the EU's market. That is a unique position that we really should be profiting from. And we're already beginning to see some of that. So some of my members just in the last week are getting phone calls from competitors in Great Britain who supply EU firms, Irish firms and elsewhere in the EU, and asking them for a partnership, asking them to do that EU work for them, asking them to ensure that that supply chain that they had been providing for years to their EU customers can be maintained, and acting as part of their business at a profit for them. So actually there's already the beginning, and business, as Aidan talked about, the business finding the least restrictions, finding a bit like water flowing down through a stream. It'll avoid the rocks and it'll get there in the end. Well, that's already beginning to happen. And we need to begin to actually understand the position that the protocol puts us in and sell that to the world, because we do have a unique opportunity here, particularly in and around manufacturing businesses, because this is largely about goods. Yes, we understand that there's big challenges for retail. Retail models will change, but that also presents an opportunity for us as well. Import substitution, that great Ulster product that we make, can we get more of that onto our shelves here in Northern Ireland and get more of that onto the shelves in Great Britain? And I know that Aidan in particular has been a massive advocate for that over the years. Well, maybe now the planets are aligning in an unexpected way and in a difficult way, but maybe now there's an opportunity there for us that we really need to be grasping.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Aidan, isn't it? You know, the whole buy local thing that's come out of COVID almost as a sort of sideline to this. And you could see that would really help. And, you know, if it's going to be difficult for us to get some of the goods that we would normally have in retail from GB, well, you know, that we might be able to source them locally instead.
There's still going to be challenges because if some of the packing, some of the ingredients come through GB. So I've always talked about integrated supply chains across these islands rather than an integrated supply chain on this island. But yeah, there is, and I think, you know, retailers, the big retailers buy about 2.7 billion of Northern Ireland agri-food. They only use about 0.7 billion here in Northern Ireland. The rest of it goes to GB. We are 1.9 million people, but we feed about 10 million people altogether. And there is still room to grow that agri-food, and it's not just agri-food, there's other products that we can get here as well. I think though we need to be very clear about the fact that we will need ingredients coming from the EU, we will need some stuff coming from GB, and there's still time and we still will continue to fight on to mould the protocol. The protocol is a living document. The Joint Committee is there for the long term, and it will have to make decisions to continue to make trade profitable, not just for business in Northern Ireland, but also for households in Northern Ireland. You've got to remember we have half of the discretionary income of Great British households. But the reason we all came together on this is because there was, as Stephen said, there was no voice, and there was a political vacuum. And the reason that we stayed together, even when the politicians came back, was because they weren't putting on a united front on Brexit. And, you know, if you'd have told me 5 years ago I would be standing shoulder to shoulder with farmers and processors, and usually, you know, we've taken the rug from under each other at every opportunity, and now we're standing together. And, you know, Stephen and Seamus are two of my best friends, and I'm very, very happy to say that. We trust each other implicitly, we slobber at each other incessantly, but there's been, you know, I have said a lot of times that the one of the few good things to come out of this process is the relationships that have been made and strengthened across it, and that the fact that genie is out of the bottle when it comes to business standing up to politics and business standing up on the world stage, because it's not just us standing up to Stormont or trying to lead the discussion. It's us standing toe-to-toe with Michael Gove and the Prime Minister and the European leaders and the Taoiseach. And I think, if there's anything to be learned from this, is that if you can get people to agree around a high level set of principles, you can really, leverage the earth.
Yeah. Seamus, yes, away you go.
Yeah, Wendy, I would say as well, I think, what Aidan Stevens says there, I think there was a lack of unity, maybe politically, with Brexit, and because of the different viewpoints, it was so varied. And businesses, it was like we were standing back, and it was like watching like a car crash in slow motion. It was like, do we try and intervene here and save things and try and make it as good as possible, or do we stand back? It's that old Seamus Leheny, saying there's no such thing as innocent bystanding, really, and I think the business community, Brexit has really, it's given us a voice. And I remember reading something about a year or two ago, and it kind of hit home with me. And it said, like, the Northern Ireland business community at the start of the Troubles, it went out to play golf, but it never came home. And for understandable reasons, people didn't want to keep their head below the parapet. And I think Brexit was just that pivotal moment where we just said, enough's enough, we need to speak up here. And, we've touched on, I think, the opportunities. I think the protocol, it is going to be a living document. Aidan says there, it's here for the long run. We can sculpt it, we can mold it. And what I'm hearing now, conversations I'm getting from companies now is like, okay, how do we build on this access? We have unique access to the GB market, but also with the EU. And it's kind of hitting home. There's a lot of companies who haven't realised that they can trade with the EU quota, tariff-free, customs-free. And to give you one example, like Volvo trucks, they're made in Sweden. And, they're faced potentially with a 10% tariff in GB from January. But if you move them under transit to Northern Ireland, the price stays the same, and you'll be saving about £10,000 a truck. And that's the same for everything. Food products, wine from France, cheese from Italy. It's all the same. So I think we might see a reconfiguration of some supply chains, and certainly when I speak to some businesses who are in the whole distribution market, they're getting more and more inquiries now from companies saying, okay, what can you do for us in terms of, fresh food coming from the continent and things like that?
So one of the questions I asked very early on in this whole process was, if that happened, am I ever going to be able to get out of the end of my road onto the A1? I think the answer to that might be no, if things continue the way they are. Trevor, maybe a final word from you, if I could. I've tried to look a bit at the glass half full part of this, because we've been through all of the awfulness of the possibilities of a no deal. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that Boris doesn't have any more dinners, and that we do actually get to the light at the end of this particular tunnel. So is there, as the three lads have been saying, a chance that in some ways this could be the best of both worlds for Northern Ireland?
I mean, certainly in education terms, if we look at our Magee campus, it's the closest university to Europe. With just, if you like, the border to Donegal and to Lifford. So in terms of movement of students there, that's going to be a massive plus there. The UK government have started the Global Challenge Research Fund, which is to offset some of the international fundings that are there right now. The trade deals that are happening with India and the US, hopefully Northern Ireland will benefit from that as well. Certainly from a supply chain point of view, we've noticed that businesses are looking at reshoring a little bit. So instead of having that elongated supply chain where they don't know where things are, they might know their first tier supplier, but they might know their second or third tier supplier. But to manage that risk, they're bringing stuff as close to local as they can. Part of that's for security of supply. Part of it's sustainability, and part of it's just simple risk management. So if we look at it in the terms of, I said before, one time that data is the new oil. In reality, all this knowledge and information that local businesses are getting now through the three wise men and through the business community in general is really, I think, equipping us for a very strong future if we maximise the potential that we have.
Look, it's been totally great talking to all of you. This was a special Business of Possibility podcast Ulster University Business School. It was a real pleasure to have Aodhán, Seamus, Stephen and Trevor on today. Great to see you all again. I think it was Seamus who quoted Seamus Leheny there, and as he said, if we winter this one out, we can summer anywhere. Let's hope he was right. Have a great Christmas, all of you. Fingers crossed for Brexit, and you can stay up to date with the Ulster University Business School on social media, and I look forward to seeing you again when we do our new series in the new year. Thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for listening and watching.